Welcome to Glisso English. Real life stories.
Have you ever had to fight for a goal that nobody else believed in? Imagine sitting at the dinner table, keeping a secret so big it could change your entire life. Today we're following the story of a mother taking night classes in secret, hiding her textbooks under folded towels just to get her degree, while facing a world that told her to just stay home. Today's lesson features a story that so many of us can relate to, balancing family, big dreams, and overcoming unsupportive voices. As we follow her journey today, you're going to learn practical real-life English vocabulary about courage, daily struggles, and standing up for yourself. Grab a notebook and let's jump into Chapter 1.
Maya scrubbed her right hand under the running water, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. On the edge of her thumb, a dark smudge of blue ink stubbornly clung to her skin. Just a pen mark, she told herself, nothing to panic about. It was 9:15 p.m. She had just slipped through the back door, stepping quietly into the dim kitchen. Upstairs, the house was silent, save for the low hum of the television in the living room where Mark sat. He thought she was returning from an extra shift at the grocery store, a harmless lie she had rehearsed a dozen times. In reality, she had spent the last 2 hours sitting in room 204 at the local community college, staring at a syllabus for adult basic education and English composition. "Why waste your time with books?" Mark had scoffed a month ago when she brought up finishing her high school diploma. "Your job is right here, taking care of the house, the kids. That's real life, Maya, not some dream." She had stayed quiet then, but the hunger inside her hadn't died. It had only grown stronger, sharper. Drying her hands on a dish towel, Maya reached deep into her tote bag and felt the stiff cardboard corner of her new textbook. A sudden rush of pride washed over her, replacing her fear. The class was hard, and the younger students had intimidated her, but she had stayed. She had taken notes. She hid the book beneath a stack of folded laundry, smoothed her apron, and took a deep breath. She had survived night 1.
The alarm rang at 5:30 a.m., slicing through the quiet morning before anyone else woke up. Maya rolled out of bed, her limbs heavy with exhaustion, but her mind surprisingly sharp. While the coffee brewed, she tiptoed down the hallway toward the laundry room. She pulled down the stack of folded towels on the top shelf and reached behind them. Her new textbook sat hidden in the dark corner, its crisp cover cool against her fingertips. She opened the book to Chapter 1, Sentence Structure and Vocabulary Building. Standing beside the humming washing machine, she traced her finger down a list of unfamiliar words. Persevere, vocabulary, obstacle, resilience. She whispered each word slowly under her breath, matching the pronunciations her teacher had demonstrated the night before. Floorboards creaked overhead, signaling that Mark was stirring upstairs. Panic spiked in her chest as she quickly closed the book, slid it back behind the towels, and smoothed the laundry over it. Moments later, Mark walked into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes and yawning. "Why are you up so early?" he asked, pouring himself a mug of coffee without looking at her. "Just wanted to get a head start on the laundry and breakfast," Maya said, her voice steady despite the rapid beat of her heart. "Good," he muttered, grabbing his lunchbox from the counter. "I need my blue shirt ironed before I leave." As he walked back toward the living room, Maya looked back at the closed laundry room door. The textbook was hidden out of sight, but the words she had just practiced remained written clear and bright in her mind. The harsh fluorescent lights of room 204 hummed overhead as Mr. Davis wrote across the whiteboard. A sentence needs two main parts, he explained, tapping his marker against the smooth surface, a subject and a predicate. Maya sat in the second row, clutching her pen so tightly her knuckles turned pale. Around her, younger students leaned back in their chairs, tapping on laptops or scrolling through their phones with ease. To Maya, the complex grammar rules on the board felt as intimidating as a foreign language. "Let's practice reading aloud," Mr. Davis announced, looking around the classroom. "Maya, would you read the first sentence on page 12? Her stomach dropped, a cold wave of anxiety washing over her. She opened her textbook, the printed words blurring together under her nervous gaze. She struggled to balance her responsibilities, Maya began, her voice trembling softly in the quiet room. She paused on a long word, her throat tightening as she stumbled over the syllables. Silence hung in the air, and Maya felt every eye in the room turning toward her. She looked down at her desk, heat flushing her cheeks, ready to whisper an apology and sink into her seat. "Take your time, Maya," Mr. Davis said gently, offering a warm, reassuring smile from the front of the room. "Reading out loud takes courage, and you are doing just fine." Maya took a slow, deep breath, cleared her throat, and looked back at the page. "Responsibilities," she read aloud, her voice clear and steady this time. As Mr. Davis nodded in approval, a quiet wave of confidence bloomed in her chest. The kitchen table was covered in folded shirts, socks, and a stack of unread mail. Maya was in the middle of preparing dinner when Mark walked through the front door, tossing his heavy keys onto the counter. "What a long day," he sighed, unbuttoning his work shirt as he walked toward the living room. Maya turned back to the sizzling pan on the stove, her heart suddenly missing a beat. She had left her open tote bag resting on the kitchen chair, right next to the laundry stack. Before she could move, Mark reached over to grab his mug and stopped in his tracks. Sticking out of her bag was a white sheet of paper printed with bold headline letters, "Quiz Number 1, Grammar Foundations." "What's this?" Mark asked, picking up the paper and squinting at the teacher's red ink marks at the top. Panic surged through Maya like an electric current as she wiped her hands on her apron and stepped forward. "Oh, that's just a flyer from the kids' school," she stammered, reaching out her hand to take it back. Mark pulled the sheet higher, his brow furrowing as he read the red notes aloud. "Great progress on noun clauses, Maya." He dropped the paper onto the table, his eyes locking onto hers with a mixture of confusion and suspicion. "Kids' school?" he asked, his voice dropping into a cold, measured tone. "This has your name on it." The air in the room grew heavy and suffocating as Maya stood frozen under his sharp gaze. "Are you keeping something from me, Maya?" he demanded, stepping closer to the table. Maya swallowed hard, forced a tight smile, and snatched the paper, folding it quickly into her pocket. "It's just an adult reading group from the library," she said softly, her voice shaking slightly. Mark stared at her for a long, silent moment before shaking his head and walking away into the living room. Maya leaned heavily against the kitchen counter, listening to the TV blare in the background. She pulled the quiz out of her pocket, looking at her name written proudly in red ink. She knew the lies were wearing thin, and hiding her dream was becoming as dangerous as chasing it. The community college cafeteria was loud, filled with the clatter of plastic trays and overlapping conversations.
Maya sat at a small table near the window, a lukewarm cup of coffee on her right and her vocabulary notebook on her left. She was trying to memorize new vocabulary terms, but the tiredness from working and managing her home was catching up to her. A tray slid onto the table across from her, breaking her focus. "Is this seat taken?" a voice asked gently. Maya looked up to see a woman in her early 30s wearing a faded blue jacket and a tired but warm smile. It was Sarah, the student who sat in the front row during their English class. "Not at all," Maya replied, quickly shifting her notebook to make room. Sarah sat down with a sigh, untying her work apron and setting it aside. "I saw you reviewing your notes," Sarah said, pointing at Maya's page. "The grammar rules are tough, aren't they?" "Very," Maya admitted, feeling a sudden wave of relief at speaking to someone who understood. "I feel like I'm running behind everyone else." "You're not," Sarah said firmly, taking a sip of her water. "I work 2 shifts at a diner and I have a toddler at home. Some nights I study in my car." Maya stared at her, surprised by Sarah's openness. "My husband doesn't know I'm taking this class," Maya blurted out before she could stop herself, the weight of her secret slipping out. Sarah didn't look shocked or judgment-filled. She simply nodded with deep understanding. "We all have our reasons for being here, Maya," Sarah said softly, "and none of us are doing this because it's easy." They spent the next 30 minutes quizzing each other on vocabulary words and sentence structures. For the first time since starting school, Maya didn't feel like an outsider carrying a hidden burden. She had found a friend, and with that friendship came a new kind of strength.
The smell of burnt toast hung thick in the air as Maya rushed across the kitchen floor. It was 5 p.m., and her midterm exam began at 6:30 p.m. She reached for the stove dial to turn down the heat on the simmering soup, but the burner clicked wildly and died. "What's wrong now?" Mark asked, walking into the kitchen with his arms crossed and a scowl on his face. "The stove won't light," Maya said, her heart accelerating as she tried the knob again. Mark scoffed, stepping past her to slam the oven door shut. "Great, I have an early shift tomorrow, and dinner isn't even ready." Maya looked at the clock on the wall, 5:20 p.m. She needed to leave the house in 40 minutes, but the kitchen was in chaos, and Mark's irritation was rising fast. "I'll fix it, Mark. Just give me a few minutes," she said, trying to keep her voice steady while panic churned in her stomach. She quickly pulled out an electric hot plate from the pantry, set the soup pot on top, and plugged it in. While the soup heated, she grabbed a rag to wipe the counters, her mind racing through her study notes. Subject-verb agreement, compound sentences, conjunctions, and, but, or, so. She repeated the grammar rules silently like a prayer, while Mark sat at the table tapping his fingers impatiently. By 6:05 p.m., she served his bowl, set the rest of the food aside for the kids, and grabbed her tote bag. "Where are you going in such a rush?" Mark demanded, looking up from his bowl. "I have an extra shift at work," Maya lied, her voice tight as she pulled her coat on. "I have to go." She ran out into the cold night air, her legs moving fast as she headed toward the bus stop. Her hands were shaking, and her body was exhausted from the stress of the evening. She sat down on the bus, pulled out her flashcards, and stared at the words under the dim overhead light. The night had started in absolute chaos, but as she walked into room 204 just as the bell rang, she knew she wasn't going to turn back. The principal's office was quiet, except for the steady ticking of a wall clock. Maya sat on the edge of a padded chair, holding her daughter's report card in her hands. Across the desk sat Mr. Henderson, the middle school principal, leaning back with a polite but dismissive smile.
"Look, Mrs. Lynn, your daughter Lily is a bright girl," Mr. Henderson said, tapping a folder on his desk. "However, her reading scores are dropping, and we feel placing her in a lower track English group next semester is the most practical solution." In the past, Maya would have nodded, smiled nervously, and accepted whatever authority figures decided for her family. She would have stumbled over her words, afraid of making a mistake or sounding foolish. She thought about the vocabulary words she had studied late into the night: advocate, evaluate, alternative. Maya sat up straight, placed the report card firmly on the desk, and looked Mr. Henderson directly in the eye. "I understand your concern, Mr. Henderson," Maya said, her voice clear and surprisingly firm. "Lily doesn't lack comprehension, she lacks targeted support in vocabulary. If we provide structured reading exercises at home, I expect her to be reevaluated before the semester begins." The principal stared at her for a long moment, then slowly nodded and reached for his pen. "That is a fair request, Mrs. Lynn," he conceded, revising the note in Lily's file. "We can set up a review in 4 weeks." Walking out of the school into the afternoon sun, Maya took a deep breath of fresh air. She realized that learning English wasn't just about passing tests or earning a diploma. It had given her something far more valuable: a voice to stand up for the people she loved. The front door was wide open, letting in the chilling autumn draft. Maya stepped into the entryway, her arms heavy with grocery bags, but stopped dead in her tracks. The living room was littered with her papers: practice essays, vocabulary flashcards, and graded quizzes spread out across the coffee table. In the center of the room stood Mark, holding her leather-bound study binder in his hand. His face was flushed with anger, his knuckles white as he gripped the plastic cover. "What is all this, Maya?" Mark asked, his voice low and trembling with rage. Maya dropped the grocery bags onto the floor, a can of soup rolling uselessly across the linoleum. Her heart raced, but the fear that used to paralyze her failed to arrive. "It's my schoolwork, Mark," she said, her voice steady as she stepped into the room. "Schoolwork?" she spat, tossing the binder onto the couch, sending loose notebook pages flying. "You lied to me for months, working extra shifts, library reading groups. You've been going to college behind my back." "Because I knew you would react like this, Mark," answered Maya, quietly, holding his gaze. "You're supposed to be here, caring for this family," Mark shouted, stepping closer and gesturing wildly at the house. "You think you're better than us now? You think some piece of paper makes you smart?" "I am caring for this family," Maya said, her tone sharp and precise, "and I am doing this for me. If you can't accept that I want to improve my life, Mark, that is your problem, not mine." Mark stared at her, stunned into silence by the cold strength in her voice, a voice he no longer recognized. He shook his head, turned on his heel, and slammed the bedroom door shut behind him. Maya stood alone in the quiet room, looking down at her scattered notes. Her secret was out, but as she knelt down to collect her papers, she knew she would never hide again.
The kitchen was dead silent, save for the rhythmic tapping of Maya's pen against her open notebook. Outside, the late-night rain lashed against the window pane, matching the stormy tension lingering in the house. Since the blow-up 3 days ago, Mark had barely spoken a word to her, moving through the hallway like a stranger. Maya looked down at the blank top page of her final English assignment, personal narrative essay, 500 words. The prompt on the assignment sheet sat before her, bold and simple. Describe a moment of profound personal transformation.
She dipped her pen, hesitated for a moment, and then began to write, the ink flowing smoothly across the blue lines. She wrote about the quiet shame of feeling invisible and the terrifying first night she walked into room 204. She wrote about hiding textbooks under laundry, learning complex grammar by flashlight, and finding her voice in a room full of strangers. Every sentence was a declaration of her own dignity, structured with precise grammar and rich vocabulary she had fought so hard to master. She didn't write with anger toward Mark, but with absolute clarity about her own worth and her right to grow. By 2 a.m., she wrote her final concluding sentence, placed her pen on the table, and read the page aloud to the empty room. Her voice didn't tremble or stumble over a single syllable. It sounded strong, resonant, and entirely hers. Pouring her struggles onto that paper hadn't just completed her course requirements, it had healed the broken parts of her spirit. She neatly slid the essay into her tote bag, turned off the kitchen light, and walked upstairs with her head held high.
The auditorium was filled with the low hum of chatter and the bright flash of cameras. Maya stood in the backstage hallway, smoothing the front of her navy blue graduation gown. She adjusted the square cap on her head, her fingers tracing the smooth black fabric with deep reverence. Beside her, Sarah was bouncing on her heels, clutching her diploma cover and smiling through tears. "We made it, Maya," Sarah whispered, squeezing her arm tightly. "We actually made it." Maya smiled back, feeling a warm, unstoppable wave of pride wash through her chest. She looked out through the side curtain into the crowded rows of seating. Mark was not there. His seat remained empty, just as she had expected. But in the third row sat Lily and her younger brother. Lily was holding up a brightly painted poster board that read, "Go, Mom! We are so proud of you!" "Maya Lin!" A microphone crackled over the loudspeakers, echoing through the packed hall. Maya took a deep, steady breath, stepped out onto the stage, and walked toward the podium. Her footsteps were confident, echoing clearly across the wooden floorboards under the bright stage lights. She shook the dean's hand, took her hard-earned diploma, and turned to face the cheering audience. Looking down at her children's glowing faces, Maya knew her life was permanently changed. She had started this journey in the dark, scrubbing ink marks off her skin in a quiet kitchen. Now, holding her future in her hands, she stepped into the light, a secret student no longer.
What a powerful story! Maya showed us that no matter how difficult your environment is, taking small steps toward your education can completely change your life. Now, I want to hear from you. What was your favorite new vocabulary word from today's story? Drop it in the comments below and write a practice sentence with it. I'll be replying to as many as I can. You can find all the vocabulary of the story down below in the description box. If Maya's journey inspired you today, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss our next real-life English story. Keep practicing, stay confident, and I'll see you in the next story. Goodbye.